Good evening and welcome. Tonight we take you inside the October 9, 2025 broadcast of ABC World News Tonight with David Muir. Over the next 40 minutes we will travel across continents, from the capitals of Africa to the corridors of power in Washington, to bring you the stories that are shaping our time. We will begin by turning to Africa, then to the United States, then pause to draw comparisons and lessons, before concluding with what the future may hold. Stay with us. Let us begin in Africa. In Africa today, one of the boldest moves comes from the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, or COMESA. The bloc has launched a digital retail payments platform to allow cross-border trade in local currencies, cutting out the reliance on the US dollar. This change is not just technical, it is symbolic of a broader push by African states to reclaim financial sovereignty and boost intra-African commerce. SMEs, which are the lifeblood of many economies, will benefit from lower transaction costs and smoother trade processes. In South Africa, the government has attracted intense global interest in its $500 million foreign funding initiative. Over 100 proposals have poured in, ranging from bilateral loans to ESG-linked instruments. South Africa is striving to diversify beyond traditional Eurobond funding, signaling a shift in how African economies access capital. Yet challenges loom. In Senegal, a major outbreak of Rift Valley fever has led to at least 17 deaths and several dozen infections. The disease, often tied to livestock and mosquito vectors, is a reminder of how fragile health systems remain in many African nations, especially when donor aid is uncertain. Speaking of aid, the impact of U.S. cuts is already being felt. The U.S. has slashed billions in foreign aid across Africa, leading to the collapse of health, nutrition, and disease control programs. In places like Ethiopia and Zimbabwe, vaccination campaigns have stalled, and outbreaks of malaria, cholera and other preventable diseases are surging. In Somalia, where displacement was already a crisis, the withdrawal of support compounds human suffering. Turning to conflict and diplomacy, the Democratic Republic of Congo's President Félix Tshisekedi made a powerful appeal to Rwandan President Kagame to stop backing the rebel group M23, asking for an immediate halt to hostilities. This plea came during a global investment forum in Brussels. The war in eastern DRC remains one of Africa's long-running humanitarian tragedies, with millions displaced and untold suffering. Meanwhile, universities in South Africa are reeling from protests. At the University of Fort Hare, student protests led to fires at several campus buildings, forcing a suspension of operations. The unrest reflects deeper frustrations among youth over inequality, joblessness, and governance. Also in the domain of continental breadth, Ethiopia has officially begun shipping goods under the African Continental Free Trade Area (AFCFTA) framework. This move is part of the long-term ambition to weave Africa into a single marketplace, lowering barriers, building supply chains, and increasing its economic weight globally. But Africa is not only about geopolitics and economics. The sporting sphere carries meaning too. The 2025 Men's Hockey Africa Cup of Nations is scheduled to take place in Egypt beginning October 11. The tournament underscores Africa's growing engagement with diverse sports beyond football and cricket. Thus Africa, tonight, is a canvas of aspiration, contestation, and struggle, financial experimentation, diplomatic tensions, health crises, social upheaval, and continental integration all in parallel. Now we shift our focus to the United States. In Washington, the big story is the tentative ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, which was mediated with U.S. involvement. Under the deal, Israel is to begin pulling back troops and Hamas will release hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. The U.S. will deploy 200 troops to Israel to run a civil-military coordination center to support and monitor implementation of the truce. The world waits to see if this step brings a fragile peace or is resisted by hardliners in either camp. Domestically, political tensions remain high. Former New York Attorney General Letitia James was indicted on charges of bank fraud, a development that has deep legal and political resonance. Some view the indictment as part of an ongoing struggle over rule of law, power, and accountability in American politics. At the White House, President Trump convened a cabinet meeting on October 9, demonstrating his continued engagement in governance and signaling further executive action. The administration's posture in both domestic and foreign affairs is being closely watched, especially as the ceasefire and foreign aid decisions unfold. On the fiscal front, the U.S. is grappling with government shutdown threats, budget constraints, and legislative gridlock. Some agencies have begun furloughs, services are strained, public trust is under pressure. The questions loom: will America sustain its global commitments while managing domestic fragility? How will U.S. credibility fare if foreign obligations clash with internal priorities? Let us now pause and compare what is happening in Africa and in the United States, and draw connections and contrasts. First, consider sovereignty and agency. Africa's push for local currency payments, sovereign funding initiatives, and stronger continental trade frameworks reflect renewed agency. Many African states are saying, "We won't just be passive recipients of foreign aid or strategic targets for external powers." Meanwhile, the U.S. still operates from a position of global power, but its internal divisions are exposing limits to that power. Leadership credibility and coherence matter. Second, examine aid and dependency. African countries are being forced to confront what happens when aid is withdrawn. Health systems that once relied on foreign funding are collapsing. The U.S., in contrast, debates its own capacity to deliver domestic programs, but does not depend on others for its basic functioning. The asymmetry is stark. Yet this moment could push Africa to build resilient domestic institutions, diversify revenue, and reduce dependence, or risk deeper inequality and instability. Third, on security and diplomacy, both regions confront strategic challenges. The U.S. uses its military, diplomacy, and resources in places like the Middle East, but faces domestic cost, political backlash, and shifting public opinion. African states navigate whether to accept foreign bases or aid with strings attached, or assert autonomy. In the DRC example, President Tshisekedi publicly called out a neighbor to halt support for rebel violence, that is diplomacy in the face of layered conflicts. Fourth, crisis resilience is being tested. Africa is coping with health outbreaks, protests, conflict, and financial shocks all at once. The U.S. is enduring political polarization, foreign entanglements, and institutional fractures. The region that adjusts faster, by innovation, flexibility and legitimacy, will fare better in turbulent times. Fifth, there is a lesson about narrative and perception. Africa has often been framed in victim stories: famine, war, disease. But tonight's developments tell a more complex story of ambition, tension, recalibration. The U.S., often portrayed as global leader, now faces narratives of overreach, internal dysfunction, and contested legitimacy. The way these stories are told, and by whom, will influence foreign investment, public sentiment, and alliances. As we look ahead, several themes demand our attention. The U.S. must decide whether global engagement remains central or gets scaled back under domestic pressures. Africa must exercise discipline, leveraging new tools like digital currencies, regional trade, and local financing while avoiding new forms of dependence or exploitative deals. Diplomacy and partnerships must shift from transactional to sustainable. Crises, health, climate, conflict, will intensify. Institutions that are weak will break. The moral dimension matters. Reputation, trust, ethics, and accountability cannot be secondary. To our viewers tonight, the world is not divided neatly into developed and developing. Africa and the United States are mutually entangled through trade, security, ideas, migration, and global dynamics. What happens in Kigali, Kinshasa, or Lilongwe echoes in Washington, and vice versa. Thank you for watching World News Tonight with David Muir. I'm David Muir. Good night, and good luck to all.